Mary is the National Children's and Young People's Advisor for the Church of England, brings with her a wealth of experience and wit. Is that fair to say? Please give a warm joined-up conference welcome to Mary Hawes.
Thank you very much. I was thinking, what advice would I give to my 16-year-old self? It would probably be, stop being so blooming smug. We're thinking, I want to read you a parable before I start. When a great crowd gathered and people from town to town came to him, Jesus said in a parable, a sower went out to sow his seed. And as he sowed, some fell on the path and was trampled, and the birds of the air ate it up. Some fell on the rock, and as it grew, it withered for lack of moisture. Some fell among thorns, and the thorns grew with it and choked it. Some fell into good soil, and when it grew, it produced 100-fold. As Jesus said this, he called out, "Let anyone with ears to hear, listen." I'd like you all to stand up, please. It's all right, it's not threatening. I'd like you to sit down if you came to faith in your 50s, 60s, or 70s. You age very well. Sit down if you came to faith in your 40s. In your 30s? In your 20s? Have a quick look around, see how many people are still standing. In your teens, 12 to 19-ish, and younger than that. You've just matched the research that we've seen that tells us that when people who are practicing Christians are asked, at what age did you come to faith? 76% say before the age of 18. 76 say before the age of 18. I wonder if 76% of our church activities are put into helping under 18s come to faith. Let me tell you a little bit about my faith journey. These are some of the people that were in my life. I'm one of those people who can't tell you the day that I was converted because it feels as though I've known God since I was born. I've never not known a time when I didn't feel close to God, and I think that's partly because I grew up within the Roman Catholic tradition with a mother who took me to church from, I think, about the age of a week. There's a couple of pictures there that just remind me of the church that embraced me. That even as a Roman Catholic church never said to me, because you're a woman, there are things you can't do. It was quite remarkable. It gave me a sense of who I am. My RE teacher, Andy Cooper, was probably, I thought he was in his 50s, he was probably 22 and newly qualified. But he was one of those people who allowed you to ask questions and instilled in me a love of the Bible. My O-levels and A-levels, which shows you my age, were very biblically focused. He would let us ask questions about the Old Testament and taught me so much. David Leeper, my youth group leader in the village where I grew up, had in his home with his wife a small group in this village that I grew up in of just maybe half a dozen of us. But he took faith seriously. He's the sort of person who, when I got my first Saturday job, said to me, "And what are you going to do about tithing?" I was thinking, I get £1 a week. Okay, so what are you going to do about tithing? He challenged me about my prayer life. He challenged me about how I was growing as a Christian from the age of 12. And he's also the person who, when I was going through some, what's this really all about? And said to him, what if this is all just a made-up story and Jesus didn't really exist? Rather than saying to me, well, he does, he looked at me and said, well, I believe it's true. But even if it's not, it's helping me be a better person and make a difference to the world. So I'm going to carry on. And for me to have that question answered in that way was so important. When I went to college, Avis Hall was my landlady. And she was somebody who believed that Christian students shouldn't sit around during the long summer vacs. They should go out and do something. So I experienced my first beach missions with Scripture Union at Walton-on-the-Naze, the one place that kind of sits and goes, "Oh, Frinton, you're so important and posh. We're Walton-on-the-Naze." But I learnt there my first opportunities of leadership. They took risks with 18-year-olds to stand on a beach and preach and talk about God. The person in the middle is Lucy. She's one of my idols. Lucy was at my church in Penge, and Lucy, at the age of 80, had that twinkle in her eye, and as she would sit in her wheelchair and see new people come through the church door, particularly if they were younger, male, quite easy on the eye, would beckon them over and say, "Could you sit with me, because I'll need help to get up to communion." But she used that as a way of getting to know people. And she showed me that even in your 80s, God has a role for you. But all of those people needed to join up. I was not just influenced by one person in growing in my faith. I was influenced by many people and opportunities. So just for a moment, and it really is be a moment, either think or speak to the person in front or behind you. What helped you or who helped you grow in your faith? Silence is very worrying, unless you're all thinking. Now, you've got conversations going that you're going to get frustrated. I've stopped them. So you have things to talk about over coffee and over lunch. Seeds of faith are sown and grown in many different places. It's very easy, if we are a volunteer or a worker within a church, to think that the church is the only place in which children and young people will come to faith or hear the seeds of faith. But actually, there are many, 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 many more young people and children in our schools than there are in our churches. We need to recognize what happens within collective worship, what happens within RE, what happens in chaplaincies and Christian unions, and the work that schools workers are doing just to be a Christian presence amongst young people, offering them a life-enhancing encounter with Jesus. But even more importantly are the fact that every child and young person belongs in a household of some configuration. How are we helping our parents, godparents, grandparents, to be those who help to grow the seeds of faith? Rebecca and I, back in 2009, wrote a book called Children's Spirituality, What It Is and Why It Matters, and talked a little bit about the research that she'd done in Nottingham schools many years ago. The thing that stands out for me from that research is that when she talked to these 6 to 11-year-olds about their experience of something bigger than them, it wasn't just crouched in Christian language, nearly all of them thought it was something to grow out of. They'd never heard adults, even those who came from churches, talking about an inner spiritual life, talking about faith. We are not very good at talking about how being a Christian makes a difference. We're very good at teaching about what difference it should make, but we're not very good at saying we struggle. I really appreciated what Hugh said right at the beginning, because saying sorry and talking about messing up is one of the things that we're really difficult at doing. And yet children need to hear us do that and to say that. And we're also very good at our churches, when we gather for worship, at separating out children and young people into their own groups so that they don't see us in the full wholeness of our Christian life. So the other thing that was really sad to see from the research that talked to Christians about when did you come to faith was that when people of any faith or religion who had once espoused a faith and then had left it were asked, at what age did you leave? 34% said it was before the age of 18. Those early years are incredibly important for preparing the soil, for rooting and grounding and growing that faith, so that birds and thorns and rocks don't take it away. Again, in her research, Rebecca talks a lot about how we might prepare the good soil. And for many of you, that will be quite familiar, because I believe Rebecca spoke here a year or so ago. But I was thinking, what are the opposites of those? She talks about the importance of space. But are we putting rocks of confinement, telling people what the truth is they should believe, our interpretation of that truth, rather than opening up the space for talking and wondering, as David did for me? Are we too focused on the products of our faith, the things that we can show and tell at the end of church on a Sunday, or that we can display to prove that we've done something and they've learned something? If your church is anything like mine, when we ask the young people or children, so what did you learn in Sunday groups today? It's kind of, don't know. And the look on the faces of the adults, kind of, well, we've let them down. Actually, process is so much more important. Sometimes the product is only a way to let the process happen. I'm going to have to look around because my eyesight isn't good enough to see that small thing in front of me there. Imagination versus prescription. When we only offer pre-prepared crafts as a response, when we don't allow imagination to be part of that, we're actually confining what the Christian faith is and what it offers us in all its fullness. And when we only offer aloofness rather than real important relationships, I'm just on the rota today, so I'm only going to be on the rota once every month, so it doesn't matter if I don't get to know you. That says an awful lot about how much we're investing. As does the fact that we need intimacy rather than being at a distance. We need to create, whether it's in school or church or home, places where children can be vulnerable, where they can feel safe in asking those questions of what if it isn't all true. Then finally, offering trust, living in trust that God is already there, that God is already working in these children and young people, rather than being anxious that it's down to us. We are only part of this. God, through the Holy Spirit, is already there working. So we need to think about how we make those connections, how we join up the places in which children are. I've put them down as school, household and church because at the moment that's the way the Church of England is looking to see how we join up our work. But actually, there are so many other places and so many other things that are important, just a few that I've put up on the screen. No one person and no one place is going to be able to offer all of this. This is why today is so important, why joining up things that children are learning and hearing about in church with what's happening in school. Helping parents join up with that in how they live and talk about their Christian faith in their homes. And not just parents, teachers and clergy or church workers, but there are a whole load of other people who are being models or not for the Christian faith. Their peers, grandparents and godparents, church-based leaders, schools workers. I will have left people off that list. So who are the people that we need to join with? And we kind of go, that's flipping hard work. It's much easier just to think it's just me and my Sunday school group. But 76% of Christians come to faith before the age of 18, and yet 38 leave before the age of 18. We need to put in that work and that effort. Research has shown us that two of the things after the influence of parents that help to root and grow and flourish and bring to fruit the seeds of faith are active participation in worship. Actually offering gifts and being involved in worship, not just with their peers, but across the generations. And the connectedness to adults in the worshipping community. Not just Sunday group leaders or youth group leaders, not just schools workers, but people who are struggling and living their faith, not in a perfect way, but in a way that shows Jesus accepts us because we're not perfect, not because we are. Mike's equivalent in Southwark Diocese recently asked the young people there, what is it that you want to help you grow in faith? Again, I'm just going to turn around. I won't read all of these out, but you can see the words that I've picked out that are really important. They long for the things of God. They long to be involved in their communities in all ways. They want to grow and learn and connect. We are talking about a generation that wants connectedness, that isn't bothered about your age. They want relationship and connectedness. They told us that they want to be welcomed, to be known by name. Many churches think, well, that's the job of those who are on the rota. That's the job of the person we've employed to work with children and young people, but it is not. It is the role of all of us to know and love the children and young people in our congregations and in our schools and in our homes. And they need sermons that they can relate to. Well, I think that probably goes for all of us. Having a sermon that has nothing to do with your life is very esoteric and tells you the Greek definitions of everything is not a good sermon unless it tells you how to live your life differently for Jesus. And then they wanted space to be creative, to share their experiences of God, to offer what gifts and skills they have into the whole mix, rather than the adults keeping the power for themselves. And then finally, to be heard and feel they have a real role, not just reading when it's Youth Sunday, but being offered roles that are part of the whole church. My goddaughter at the age of 7 was on the flower rota because she loved flowers. And she was mentored by the flower ladies. So how are we offering real roles so that young people and children can serve in their schools, in their homes, and in our churches? A couple of years ago, we asked young adults who'd stuck with the Anglican Church, because the narrative is that they don't bother, they leave the Anglican Church as soon as they can. Well, not everybody does. We said, what was it that kept you within the church? What rooted your faith?
Seeds need good soil to turn into thriving plants. So we asked, what helps the seeds of faith in young people root, grow and flourish? How can we be good soil? Here's what we heard. Inclusion. There has to be some way of getting us to be part of a whole family. Young people told us they value peer groups and activities, but don't want to be separated from the main church. Intergenerational relationships are vital for faith to flourish. Equality. I was treated really maturely, really early. I was valued as a person, not just the token youth. We heard that faith flourishes when there is the chance to put it into action. Young people want to be heard in decision-making, included in leadership and service, and help to make a difference in the church. Space. Adolescence brings plenty of upheaval and questions. Young people told us of the importance of safe space to voice questions, to be welcomed and accepted, and not to be judged. Young people need to know that they are not on their own. They need to know that there is a raft of love on which they can float until they reach a shore. Leadership. Just being hip and cool isn't effective. Young people want genuine, meaningful experiences and relationships. We heard of the importance of direction and positive role models, of youth leaders who build bridges and develop relationships with the wider church. But youth leaders need support and to be part of the church's vision and strategy. Improving the soil of the church doesn't take huge amounts of money or large congregations, but it does require work to clear the stones and thorns which stop the seeds of faith rooting. It needs congregations to work together to create good soil so that young people grow and flourish as active disciples of Jesus Christ in this and future generations.
When we constantly separate children and young people out into their own groups, when we constantly don't bother to listen to what they have to say because it's too challenging or it feels as though it might be too much hard work, when we only want to give them right answers rather than listening to their questions, we risk the danger of being the very stones and thorns that choke the seeds of faith. A day like today is so important because it's about joining up. It's about joining up in so many ways and recognizing that no one of us is the only gardener who can help to till that soil. It's a day when we need to join up across the generations to recognize that it is not about being hip and young and cool. It's being about an authentic disciple of Jesus, showing what it is to live, whatever age we are. We need to join with the other churches and agencies to recognize that the young people in our churches may be in a school where there is a schools worker who is helping them to ask those questions. So we need to join up with the people who are here today. We need to join in with what God is already doing. God is already at work in this generation. We don't need to think it's down to us to get pushing God into action and saying, have you not thought about the children and young people? God already is in work in them. So we need to join in and celebrate where we see God at work. But we also need to join together so that we too learn with and from the children and young people whom we serve. When we do that, the soil will be tilled, the roots of weeds will be pulled out, they'll grow back. But the stones and the thorns might be cleared so that not only will the faith of children and young people grow, but we'll find that our faith too will be enriched by what we learn and what we see. So as we enjoy the rest of this joined up conference, let's think how we're going to help our churches and our Christian communities to join up to recognize that it's not your job to be Christ in human flesh for these children and young people. It is the role of everybody. The welcomer at the door, the person who clears up, everybody shows what it means to be a disciple of Jesus to those children and young people. And they need to look for how children and young people show us what it means to be a disciple. So let's join up and grow faith together. Thank you.